Hello, 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 citizens of Avina Vlogs and the Writer's Corner podcast. Welcome to a brand new episode. We're on episode 44 of the Writer's Corner podcast. And this week we are going to be discussing how and I hope you guys will as well, prepare for an interview. First, quick update on Lexington and 5th. We just finished chapter 21 of Lexington and 5th and published that this past weekend. And it went very well. It was called Confrontation. It was all about this big confrontation between our protagonist, Ella, and one of her most hated enemies that is directly responsible for some of the big things in her life. And one of the most least liked characters in this book, which is Greg. There's a big confrontation between them this week, and if you guys want to see what all went down, make sure you go to Wattpad.com or on your Wattpad app, search for Lexington and 5th, or just for me, author Anthony Avina, and read the latest chapter. We're on chapter 21 of 52, guys. We're nearing the halfway point. Just a few more weeks and we're going to be halfway through this novel. And, yeah, that's the big update right now. But you guys clicked on this interview and this video, or not interview, it's a video, because you guys want to hear all about how to prepare for an interview. If you guys are like me, the thought of being interviewed could be very nerve-wracking. It's especially tough for me, I think, because I suffer from social anxiety a lot. It's a big issue. I recently talked about it in a video on my YouTube channel that discussed mental health awareness. Social anxiety is a very real thing, and it can be crippling. And so the thought of, putting myself out there and, talking to people that I don't know, it could be a very, very scary, hectic thing to think about. But it is worth doing. I chose this career because I love writing, and part of being a writer, a professional writer, is interviews. And I hope this will help you, because I recently, this past year, did my first phone interview for my local paper, and I had to learn a lot about how to, prepare mentally and emotionally for the brevity of it all, the massive amount of pressure it could be to put out a great interview. Now, I've done several email interviews, and one of which I am going to read to you guys in this podcast, so you guys can get an idea of not only the kind of writer that I am, but how I go about answering these questions. But first, here are my 5 steps to preparing for an interview. First of all, take a breath. It can be nerve-wracking, but imagine this. Someone wants to talk to you. Someone is interested enough in what you're writing, what you bring to the table, to want to learn more about you and share what they learn with an audience. Yes, that is definitely a lot of pressure, but it's also flattering because someone is interested in you. So before you panic, take a deep breath. Just like that. Take a deep breath and enjoy that brief moment of flattery for what it is. Someone wants to talk to you. Step 2, write out some practice questions to answer. This is what I did when I first found out I was going to be doing a phone interview for my paper. I sat down and I did research on some basic interview questions that are typically asked, and I wrote them down, and I started practicing my answers. I started to think about how I would go about answering, and then after I wrote out what the answers would be, I would sit down and I would just have, moments where I would pretend I was being asked the question, and I would take a breath and answer in a calm, demeanor. I would let me go to step 3, because this is where my answer is going. Step 3, I made a video practicing my interview technique. I have never published it, and I don't have it anymore, but A good way to practice your interview skills is to make a video so you can see what you look like and what your technique is when you're doing an interview. It'll help you to think about what you look like in that video and to change anything you didn't like, and to have a clearer state of mind when you're going into an interview. That way you know what you're doing when you go into it. Even if you don't know all the questions right away, being prepared like that will really help you a lot. The fourth thing I do is practice with a friend or a family member to put myself in a comfortable state of mind. Having someone that you know, that you care about, that cares about you, someone to have your back, practice with you with those practice interview questions really can put you at ease quite a bit. I practiced with some family members before my interview, and they helped me to learn how to, control my breath, to calm my heart rate, and to, not, lollygag, but at the same time to take my time a little bit to think about the answer and speak slowly, calmly. I probably would have been babbling a lot if I had just gone into this without practicing with a friend or a family member, and it really does help a lot when you're doing these things. Finally, the fifth most important thing that you could do to prepare for an interview is to remember to be yourself. The person interviewing you is interviewing you because they like what they saw or heard from you or read from you. And your writing should always be a reflection of yourself, should always be told with an honest voice, even if it's fiction, The interviewer is interested in you and not the public persona or, fake you. They want to know the author behind the writing that got them interested in the first place. So no matter what, don't try and oversell yourself. Don't try and create some sort of big headline or anything. Just be yourself. The headline will come on its own if you're just being yourself. Never forget that. You are who the person wants to interview, not, the headlight grabbing version of yourself. Now, as a little bonus thing, if you get an email interview request instead of like a phone or in-person or video chat request, really take your time and think about the best answer possible, because it's not live or in person, you really have time to think about your answers, and your answers are going to reflect how your audience perceives you. Alright, so to end this podcast, I'm going to be reading a couple of questions from a recent interview I did on Goodreads with a fellow author named Itis Swoza, and I'm going to showcase a couple of questions she asked me that are pretty basic. We were discussing a short story I wrote called Bedtime and the recent novel I published, Void, and here are a couple of questions from the interview. This was an email interview. The first question she asked was, when did you start writing, and what triggered your writing will? My answer was, I started writing when I was 14 years old, but didn't start publishing until 2010, when I was 20 years old. It was in my creative writing class that I realized I wanted to be a writer. I was reading Stephen King and Peter Straub's The Talisman, and at that time, we were asked to write a short story. The way The Talisman was written, the idea of this epic adventure where the fate of the world hangs in the balance, really helped inspire a short story in which a man is given the power to alter reality with his writing, but invites an evil presence into the world in doing so, and he must set things right before the world is destroyed. That story eventually became my published story, Death for Sale. The second question she asked me was, which are the most important aspects of your work as an author? I answered, my main goal is to entertain my audience. If I can integrate a message or change the preconceived notions of society, then that is an added bonus. I just want to have my readers get lost in the story and to feel enthralled with the plot and the characters. Well, those were just a couple of questions that were asked. I'm going to leave the link for the full interview in the description of this podcast and this video. And that'll do it. Those were my top 5 steps to preparing for an interview. I hope this helped you. Thank you for listening to episode 44 of the podcast. In the comments below, let me know if you've ever been interviewed and what are some of your thoughts or ideas on preparing for said interview. If you haven't been interviewed before, what is your most nerve-wracking feeling about being interviewed? What is it that has you nervous before an interview? What aspect of it? Leave your questions down below in the description, in the comment section, or in the review section of the SoundCloud or iTunes podcast. Thank you for listening, guys. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, give this video a big thumbs up. Like this video, comment on it, favorite it, and share it. If you have not yet, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean so much to me if you did. We have a new podcast every single week. And click the eye in the sky to see today's recommended videos, playlists, and more. If, however, you're listening to this on SoundCloud or iTunes, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. It'd mean a lot to me if you did. And leave some reviews and let me know some things you'd like to see improved or changed, or what you enjoyed about the podcast, so that I can improve the podcast and bring you guys the best possible audio podcast I possibly can. So, and also, of course, as always, leave some ideas of what topics I should discuss next time. Make sure you check out the description for all our social media links and the links to interviews I've given. And that does it here for us. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week for a brand new episode of the Writer's Corner podcast. This is your host, author Anthony Avina, signing out. Long days and pleasant nights, my friends.